And a glorious day to each of you as you prepare to return your awareness into the outer room. Akasha is with you. And as I greet you this day, I greet you in the name of the two great conclaves that come in this new season of summer that is upon you soon. The Radiant Rose Conclave coming up this weekend in Edmonton that has been given to Her Grace Mother Mary, and to the Diamond Heart Conclave in Montreal in August that is always turned over to beloved Emmanuel, beloved Master Jesus. Conclaves come with authority. They come with the authority of the great central sun. I, Akasha, my individualization and my collective soul in the great central sun is the final authority for the great central sun's magnet's presence. Let's say it a different way. Is the final authority for the universal will to fulfill all that the Father or the Christ mind decrees. Yet the Mother is not without her own Christ mind and rose heart to decree equally. And in that authority is the opportunity that has come to mystics in the past. Mystics who began their lives with some kind of desire, a searching, as initiates, and some of which became great mystics, an individual experience. The only time it became a collective experience is when those mystics attained deep spiritual realization. That spiritual realization led to the God experience. The maintaining of that God experience by the mystics made them teachers, healers, practitioners. They have come every so many tens or 25,000 years. And for 100 to 200 years, their followers benefited. Their followers' lives became greatly improved. Healings took place across the lands, all by the grace of the mystic who attained the God experience. And then once 200 to 300 years passed, the mystic often being graduated into the Ascended Master realms, 200-300 years pass. The direct radiation, the direct influence, the direct luminosity of the mystic's God experience no longer available to the followers. And too often the followers failed to apply the teachings of the mystic, which gave the mystic the God experience. Within 300 to 400 years, as the generations passed, the followers, less and less did they live their lives by the grace of that divine influence. And once again, found themselves living by mortal mind. We are in the final days of preparing for each of you a terminology, a vocabulary, an inner essay of deep spiritual realizations that are to bring for each of you the God experience. Up to now, that experience has always been an individual one, and then there has been the collective influence. Do you understand? Under the authority of the great central sun's magnet's presence, this will change for the first time since the people of earth fell from grace. As each of you and you and you begin to experience the God experience, then you and you and you and you will experience it more easily by your efforts. This is the collective under the great central sun's magnet's presence that draws the attainment of one to another when and where it is possible. We are in these final weeks. September, October always begins the new curriculum of the following year. And it is to have in place by September certain terminology, certain wordings that you have absolute clarity, understanding of what those words imply. So that if you reference them, you know immediately what they mean. So that you can shorten that which is the inner activity, the self-talk, that leads you to the self-realization, so that you can follow that with the God experience more quickly. A new term, you will therefore hear me speak more often, because still to this day, as was brought forward last week, there are still students that will ask, if there is only one presence and power and intelligence, why are the things happening in the world the terrible things that happen? So still, there is not the deep understanding. We must get to that understanding, because here is the spiritual truth I'm asking each of you to maintain in your consciousness and remember 5-6 times a day. It is important that you know that mystics and others before you have achieved it. They've achieved it on earth. They've achieved it in their movement to resurrection. They achieved it before their ascension. Not only can every one of you achieve it, it is your destiny to achieve it and fulfill it. And here is the spiritual truth. God can only be experienced directly and personally in a moment of silence. Now we could say the great I am can only be experienced directly and personally, as a personal experience, in a moment of silence. Or we can say it a different way again, the presence, if we know what the presence is. The presence can only be experienced directly and personally in a moment of silence. I ask you, if each of you individually and students around the world who are hearing this recording, and they begin to do this too, if you will hold this spiritual truth, this is a realization Your studies must lead you to realizations. I realize that my beloved presence, I talk to my presence in the outer activity. I decree to my presence. But to experience the presence, this can only be accomplished in a very personal and direct way as an experience in a moment of silence. When that comes, when the experience pierces through the seeming shell and the shell seems to break, the Christ is being revealed. The Christ is being revealed in your individuality. So now let us lay down over these next couple months the final framework of the inner worded self-talk that will lead you to that moment of being in the silence. Now, there have been moments where you have been in the silence, but what must come before that moment is intention, is desire. Why am I seeking that moment of silence? It's the breakthrough. Now, and what I am to reveal to you is only a different wording, and the initiate must have years of past experience, which you all have, to be able to hear this wording and make sure that you are open to all the experiences, because ye are worth it, and Mother Mary has seen it. That when you hear this wording, that you will not approach all of this important activity with any kind of feeling or mental activity that there's going to be a battle. The wording I introduced to you actually was introduced by St. Paul, by Paul the Apostle. I have chosen to adjust the wording. The wording that he used was carnal mind. The mind that knows materiality. The mind that is caught up in lack, limitation, disease, error, sin. Paul talked about this. Of all the disciples and apostles outside of Christ, Jesus Christ himself, who was the most illumined, who was the most experienced to talk about it? Before Paul became Paul, he was Saul of Syria. He was a Syrian. And in that old biblical language, you would hear that Saul was a sinner, had people butchered. But an overcoming, an overturning took place in him. Something happened. The word was out of the man called Yeshu ben Joseph. And all the things that were happening in Judea. And somehow this began a change, so deep and so subtle, yet Saul recognized it. And he set out to leave Syria. And in the lands approaching Judea, word was already being sent forth. The first word that was sent forth was that Yeshua had been crucified. Within days, the word, there were no telephones or emails. There were carriers of messages. They would travel on their donkeys or camels, and they would travel 5 miles, and they would give the message to the next carrier. Do you understand? And then the word on the road was that he had ascended. Saul never made it to Judea before Jesus' ascension. But when the message came to him, and he was only a few miles from Jerusalem, and when he heard, forgive me, I'm missing a major part. He was about 38 miles from Jerusalem on the road from Damascus. And he was close. He was in Judea, just inside the border. And the message had come that Yeshua had been crucified. And he went in tremendous grieving. And it was when he arrived within 3 miles. There was not automobiles, things traveling at fast distance back then. When he arrived within 3 miles of Jerusalem, the word came to him that he's ascended. In that moment, there was such realizations taking place so internally that Saul collapsed. And a blinding flash of light took place in his mind. Unlike you, precious hearts, unlike you, who've been educated, illumined, awakened, studied, Saul had none of that. None of it. The blinding flash of light was so immense that it literally blinded him. But that blinding was a temporary, and within 5 days, his sight came back. And so, and with it, Saul, who became Paul, was changed. Completely changed. And he had to go through that horrible experience. He wasn't studied. And he had lived a life. He was quite a criminal in Syria. And so whatever happened, happened. But when the change was finished and his sight was returned, he was fully awake. And he went out as the apostle, and he went and taught. And he taught about the carnal mind. He understood. So I won't use that term, carnal mind, but a new terminology that we're going to use so that you identify, so that you have the answers. How can you have a world with such terrible things happening? And yet, how can there be mystics, the future of you, who is so awakened, so raised into a new state of consciousness, and in this new state of consciousness, Christ, a state of mind, a state of being, is revealed in each of you as your true spiritual identity. And when that starts to happen, there's only one presence. And the active principle of that presence reveals there's only one power without opposition. So as you build the framework of this understanding, you need to be able to answer yourself and to be able to assist others who are going to seek you out and require understanding. Because clearly, as you move into that mystical phase, and as I said, the truth I'm asking each of you to maintain within your consciousness all summer long. You do it individually. Do you think 7,000 students around the world who are holding this spiritual truth within their consciousness and reminding it themselves of it 5, 6 times a day? God can only be experienced directly and personally in the silence of a moment. If 7,000 of you hold that truth individually within your consciousness, it is going to lead you to so many spiritual realizations, and the realizations are going to lead you to the ability to realize how easy it is to still the mind and make your mind do what you want it to do. To be in the silence. These next 4 months, we have 2 practices. The first practice you already know about. It's the 7 sacred minutes. The purpose of that 7 sacred minutes is for you to guide yourself into the silence, that you may be raised, that you might pierce that seeming glass ceiling between your daily thinking mind and your higher Christ mind. And that happens in the silence. And as that seeming glass ceiling is pierced, streams of light begin to pass through you. And that's just the beginning of thousands of spiritual experiences every time you go into the 7 sacred moments. The other activity that I'm preparing you is the practitioner's treatment. I hope you will understand, precious heart, why I said to you, why I felt to say to you. We honor all spiritual paths. We do. And everyone must choose their own path. Yet as paths, as individuals are elevated upon their various paths that they use, those paths all lead to the tip of the mountain. They all come closer and closer. And I said at the beginning of the year that this is a serious school. It's a serious path, and it demands serious students. Because there is an achievement here. There is an attainment here for each of you to make. The help is given, the guidance is given, the teachings is given. The presence as a result of your practice, as a result of your efforts. The presence is growing within you. Your own higher Christ consciousness is coming closer to you. Everything is almost in place for you to have what you've been working centuries for. And it's simply the God experience. By now, after years of encouraging each of you to create a friendly environment with that God word, because many of you have come through religions and experiences in the outer world where You really didn't want to hear that word God again. And so there's been literally hundreds of discourses encouraging each of you to realize that the God that we speak of is not the God you're going to find in the 5 major religions. Yes, we speak of God as source, but we speak of that source as light, as love, as life. We speak of it as a universal principle, as a spiritual polarity that is not only God the Father, but God the Mother. That is not only an individualized being known as the Father or known as the Mother, but the universal mind that they are the individualization of, or the universal heart-soul that they are the individualization of. And over the years, each of you have attended workshops, you've read, you've done self-help books, you've done everything to clear yourself of the aberration of the consciousness of sin and all that under the major religions of the world makes you feel unworthy, makes you feel guilty. And it has taken years, it's taken lifetimes to shed that nonsense and all the core perceptions that came with it. God's an angry God. God's an abandoning God. Where are you? You've abandoned me. You've taken years of clearing that so that you could know that you are sovereign individuals. How close are you to very necessary spiritual realizations? And you lean on those spiritual realizations when you go into the silence, and each time you lean on different ones. But you got to have a realization of each of those spiritual statements. How close are you to acutely knowing why Jesus could say, I and the Father are one? How clear are you? Could you answer that question in 1 minute? So these are the reminders that are coming in so that you can move into that experience. Why is it that possible? Well, what have I discovered? I is consciousness. Consciousness is God. I is individual, all of you. I is infinite. God, Goddess, all that is. If I is individual, and that's what is the name of your true spiritual being. What is the name of your true spiritual being? It is I. You use the word every day. That's your spiritual name. But do you know what's involved in that? Consciousness. You are conscious. You are a conscious being. I am is I aware of itself. I am is I aware of itself, knows what it's made up of, and knows what it's capable of. I exist. I am. I am the individualized consciousness of God. But I is also the infinite consciousness of God. Did you get those two pieces? If I is your true spiritual being, it is your individualization of God, and I is also the infinite presence of God. Can you not see the power and the realization that each of you can have? That like Jesus, the truth of you is the same. And he said, all that I declare of myself is the truth of you. Can you not there say, I and the spiritual polarity of God, God the Father, God the Mother, are one? Because I is my spiritual identity. I is also the infinite identity of God. So can you understand this, and with all your studies, deepen your understanding so that leads to comprehension? The idea of whether you're going to give a treatment, the practitioner's treatment, whether you're going to do that for yourself, for someone in your family who's sick, or someone who turns to you for help. I choose not the word healing because I could have stopped you. You are all graduates. You all have your bachelor's degree in metaphysics, spirituality, ascended master teaching. You're working on your master's now. I could have stopped you at grade 10, or said differently, I could have stopped you in your third year of working on your bachelor's degree when we were talking about healing and where you can call in healing and say, okay, let's just stay here. And just practice that and work with that, and you could open your life and experience some degrees of healing. Who knows, you could have even become a healing practitioner. But that would only go so far. Because, you see, these are the pieces we must wrap up this summer. The Christ does not heal. The Christ just turns on the light, and when the light turns on, all error disappears. Disease disappears. Lack disappears. Limitation disappears. Making mistakes disappears. Not knowing the answer disappears. So you can't say, if you're in third year bachelor's metaphysics, you could say that, but you've gone farther. This is the serious path. You're going the whole way. So you can't be stuck on healing, or it's only going to be temporary. So this year you move into the final understanding. There seems to be two minds. There seems to be two worlds. We underline again the word seems because it seems that way, but it's not but it's not true. When you're the mystic and you have the God experience and you're living in the presence of God, then God or Christ becomes the activity of your health. God or Christ becomes the activity of your employment, becomes the activity of your supply. Now here, you could easily fall and stumble. And I've already mentioned this, and there must be no stumbling. The error that will block you is having the belief or feeling that you can get God to do something for you that God is not already doing. So here, we have to expand and say, okay, let's just open that picture a little bit. The tides rise and come in and go out every day. Scientists can chart that, yes? With absolute precision. At this time, you can look up in the western sky and you can see Venus and Jupiter every night. And today, in the outpouring of light, is the Jupiter Queens. So how is it that every night, right now, with the movement of the galaxy and Venus and Jupiter right there, suns and stars and galaxies move in absolute precision, no matter what's going on down here in the surface of the earth? It's only here in the surface of the earth that things are a mess. Because the people of the earth, they govern their lives by mortal mind. Mortal mind and its belief in two powers. But you know that that's not true. Here's your spiritualization. If you have the God experience, and it's a couple seconds, and then it's half a minute, then it's a minute and a half, that God experience, the shell is cracked. The activity of God, the presence of God, the consciousness of God, all of that is called the Christ. The Christ starts acting in your experience. And as the Christ starts acting in your experience, all the seeming powers that mortal mind, good and evil, that religion taught you, and all the good and all the bad just disappears. Proving the truth, and there's your spiritualization that you've been hearing over the years. There's only one presence. Now here's your next ticket. Mortal mind will never prove there's only one presence. Mortal mind believes in two powers. That's what religion gave you. It gave you a doctrine. Your originality is the tree of life that knows only perfection. The world, under the altered ego, celebrates, under the rule of Satan, said a different way, celebrates the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's mortal mind's creation. So now you have to move through a series of realizations. The mortal mind cannot create. It can't. Only I is the creator. That would be like saying, you know, the engine of your automobile has the power to drive that automobile on its own without any direction. Well, the engine's only part of a number of activities. Only I is the creator. Only God is the creator. So what has happened to the human mind? It has collapsed. It is collapsed into believing in two powers. So then the mortal mind steals the innate power that you are born with. As an individual being of consciousness, you are born with innate power. So mortal mind steals that innate power, and then it hypnotizes you to believe in two powers. Because the power of creation is innate in your spirituality, it steals that power of creation to create a world of good and evil and war and death. But mystics have, and it's your destiny, and it comes in that moment of silence. And in that single moment of silence, something shifts, something takes place. And you take on new truths. I live, breathe, move, and have my being in Christ. I live no longer by mortal mind and its belief in two powers. How quickly does the world require you? And how quickly do you need to remember to you also use the outer activity, calls and decrees and commanding your presence and the ascended masters and angels to move? Do you realize that when you have become the full incarnation of Christ, do you think that you will be decreeing? You will decree to the world, but you will not decree to God, because you are the individualization of God in full realization and experience. You want to stop that incoming storm? You won't call to the great god Ares and Neptune. You'll do it yourselves. But we're not there yet. So here you have two powerful activities. The outer activity that you've been trained in, and that's because of intervention. The outer activity would not even be available to you if it was not for Saint Germain opening the way for you to communicate directly to your presence. Imagine that you could communicate with your presence even before you've experienced your presence. All it would require is that you accept your request. That was an Ascended Master intervention. Saint Germain did that. So that's that you would have that intervention. And the world is getting a frightful, scary place. Russia and the United States are teetering and threatening each other with their war games. One accident could set off a whole string of war-related events. It is a strange thing, beloved hearts. But sometimes a mystic has used a world of war, a world of dissatisfaction, a world of even lack and disease. A mystic will use that. Most drive towards God consciousness is within, but sometimes the drive comes from without. The pressure is on you from the outer world. Blessed hearts, the people of earth do not have a good record in terms of, the people of earth do not have a good record in seeking to find or live in the presence of God in the midst of health and prosperity. What do I need God for? I'm prosperous, I'm healthy. Oftentimes, lack and disease has been a motivator to get people to look for an answer. Or sometimes people have the health, people have the prosperity, then they realize their life is still empty. There must be something more. But these are all initiations you are all intended to have passed through. I hope you realize that the desire is a great activity that is so misunderstood. And if people would inquire when they desire to do something and ask themselves, what's behind this desire? They would discover a deeper desire. And if you kept asking, you would find an even deeper desire. Many people desire freedom. And if you follow that, if you go through all the layers, the greatest desire of that people is that they know themselves aright. That they know that they are spiritual beings, that they are one with their Creator, that they are endowed with all the powers of Creator. But the mortal mind will never get those powers that you have been endowed with by the Creator. The mortal mind doesn't want those powers. It's doing very well in its belief in two powers. Very well. It makes a real mess down here, doesn't it? So it's a very interesting... Yes, dear heart.
Yes, Mother. Just for clarification's sake, so you're saying the mortal mind is your new term, the carnal mind?
Yes. Yes. The mortal mind. In the days of Paul, he referred to that as the carnal mind. And you will find many of Paul's teachings, if you can reinterpret that to today, you can see that this has already been revealed. And through the stages of what happened 2,000 years ago, and even the stages of what's happened to metaphysics and spirituality the last 150 years, there have been many spiritual groups that have come and gone. There has been no spiritual group in the world that has understood the outer activity, the divine expression of oneself to connect with powers greater than yourself and to release these powers into the outer world. While at the same time engineering a path of the inner activity that in which you make contact. Whether it's the practitioner's treatment or whether it is the 7 sacred moments, what is the primal impulse behind both? And you want to keep this as simple as you can in your self-talk. It's to consciously connect with God, to consciously connect with my presence. Can it be done? It's been done thousands of times. But thousands of times over millions of years isn't that much when there's 10 billion of you. So with the direction that you're going, you have to understand you're on a trajectory now. And there's nothing that's going to let you stray away from this trajectory. And so that's why it's so important that you understand there may be things that motivate you to start doing your treatments and going into the 7 sacred weeks. But in the practitioner's treatment that we're really going to be advancing, whether it is because something has come to your attention from yourself or someone has come to you asking for help, there are other principles that if you get those principles fastened in your mind, getting into the silence will be quicker. And that is, most practitioners will give a treatment because someone has come and asked for a healing. Something in your own world requires correction. But whether it's an individual, the number one thing is you have to take your attention off the person. You have to take your attention off the condition. If an individual or something in your own life is crying out for help, it's already there in your consciousness. You have one desire, and that's to connect with God. So whether it's something in your own world or something someone's looking to you because they know that you have a connection, your most important responsibility is as quickly as you can, forget the appearance. Because if you don't, you're going to fall into the trap that you believe that you can get God to heal that condition, that you can get God to give money to that person. This is the biggest error in both spirituality and religion, and it's the one error that holds people back more than any other error. You see, here's another way. Here's the way that Yeshu went. And for some of you, it may be a way in. And that is, what did Yeshu say? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all things will be added to you. So, you could begin an inner self-dialogue. I seek not to live by mortal mind that believes in two powers and creates all these terrible things. No. I seek to connect with God, to live in the kingdom of God. And what does that mean to me? That means to live in the presence of God, to live in the consciousness of God. Because in that higher consciousness, in that kingdom, there is only one presence acting. And it's always acting as a state of perfection. So what does that prove? It proves the non-power of mortal mind and its belief in two powers. Those two pieces you have to keep bringing together. When you have arrived. You've done your self-talk. You're giving yourself a treatment. Or you're entering into a treatment. As a practitioner, you will desire to perhaps give 7 to 10 treatments a day. You don't even have to qualify if you're really comprehending everything. You don't have to qualify that I'm going into my treatment because these 5 students over here have asked for healing. If you're aware of 5 students that have asked for healing, are they not already in your consciousness? When you get into that silence, remember, what's your spiritual truth? I'm asking you to hold all summer long. That spiritual truth is God can only be experienced directly and personally in a moment of silence. It takes 2 to 3 minutes of you talking to yourself to get yourself into that silence. To subdue in that 2 to 3 minutes, you're attempting to do a number of things. You are reviewing spiritual realizations that you have in these teachings. You are slowing the mind down, saying to the mind, peace be still. I'm not here to battle you. Peace be still. I am entering into this treatment to consciously connect with my presence, to consciously connect with God, to consciously connect with the great I of my spiritual being. You can try different wordings. Find which one resonates with you. I desire to live in the kingdom of God where there's only one presence acting. And here you might remind yourself, I did this. And so did 10 billion human beings. We all left that kingdom. We all fell into a belief in two powers. And by that belief, we hypnotized ourselves into believing that we disconnected from our God presence. But it's impossible. You can't disconnect from your God presence. Because you're alive. And your spiritual being is I. And I in the midst of you is one with the I infinite. So you can't disconnect. But you can believe in two powers that make you believe you've disconnected. Do you understand? So in that 2-3 minutes, I am consciously turning within. I am entering into my treatment today. My goal is to connect with God. I hear some spiritual realizations. I'll remind myself. mystics who've gone before me, they've heard the still small voice of that presence. And often that presence has said, I am here. Know ye not that the place that you are sitting right now is holy ground? Because I am here and I am there and I am everywhere. Know you not that if you were as pure as the purest, or whether you were the biggest sinner or criminal, it would make no difference. Once you have opened the door to me, you are restored instantly. 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 So all the years of your training, the letting go, the surrendering, the forgiveness, all that's already in place. I'm going to give myself a treatment. It doesn't seem to be a day passed by. Your messenger has gone back into doing the treatments now 2-3 times a day. His goal is to get back to 7 treatments a day, and that's outside of the 7 sacred moments. And there's not a day that an email that he does not get to have that a student is being asked to be added to the healing list. So he just registers their name in his consciousness. And he knows that if he can get into that minute, that moment of silence, and P.S., you don't want to be doing the practitioner's treatment too late in the evening, because that flash of light, even before the flash of light comes, the concentration of light that's passing through the density of the brain and mind barrier is occurring even before you see the flash of light. And your brain has to get acclimatized to it. And that's probably one reason a son has you taking lots of melatonin. But if you do it too late at night, you'll be brain awake. So probably not a great idea to do a practitioner's treatment after 9 o'clock in the evening. And so if you're 2 to 3 minutes, they include you're reviewing inwardly and silently spiritual realizations. You're reminding yourself that you're not here to battle or fight the mortal mind and its belief in 2 powers. You already have the spiritual realization that all of that is a non-power, because when you experience the presence of God, all of it instantly disappears. Now, you're going to be small if you say, God healed my supply, God healed, look what happened. No. God did not do anything that God was not already doing. You came back. Like the prodigal son, I have returned to the Father's house. I have lived outside. I have returned to the consciousness of God, into the presence of God. And as I abide there and live there, everything that God is doing in that state of beingness begins unfolding in my life. It's not because I'm special. It's not because I get God to do something for me that God is not already doing. It's me. This is where you point the finger. It's you. You took yourself out of that state of consciousness, so you're not enjoying the one presence, one power. And you've worked hard to set yourself free of the mortal mind. And then you're in the silence. You're receptive, you're open. That sense of expectation, you're just there. Sometimes a thought will pass by in your mind. What do? Do you talk to that thought? Do you say to your mind, peace be still? Are you not engaging the thinking by saying, peace be still? Can you see that thought that just appeared in your mind? Can you just see it drift away, be not attached, and just try to return to holding that silence? The moment will come. It'll just be a flash of light. It'll happen so quickly. So quickly. It'll happen in 100th of a second, if there is such a measurement. But once it's happened, the doors open a crack. And each time you come back, then that one presence starts acting in your life because you have come home. I have come home. That's the story of the prodigal son. Come home to the Father's house, and he receives the kingdom once again. Do you get it, precious hearts? Do you get it? And then there's spiritual realizations, because you got to resist temptation to think that you can coerce God. You got to resist that temptation. Your role is to become all of God by living in that presence. In the process of this mortal mind and its belief in two powers, as the treatments continue, months pass by, mortal mind and its grip on you and its belief in two powers is just being dismantled. What's being dismantled first? Because the lights are just turning on. And as the light turns on, everything in your life is perfected. And then in the 7 sacred moments, that is, as all of that's dismantling, that's to pierce through to the higher Christ mind so that you become accustomed to the higher Christ mind expressing through you. So as you trip into that and have those experiences, you can start having lovely spiritual realizations. God is the health of my countenance. God is my supply. I don't have to make that happen. I don't even have to decree it to happen. I only have to get God. I only have to get the presence. Live in the presence. Now, with all the crazy way of the world and all the demands on you, you're not living in caves, you're not living in mystery schools. So this is where you have to train yourself. You know, the wonderful thing about the practitioner's treatment, it can be 2 minutes, it can be even a minute. How long does the self-talk have to be before your mind is silent? And how quickly you're there. You're there in that consciousness. And then all the experiences unfold. It's not like the 7 sacred minutes that must be trained to specific 7 minutes. So you try it as often as you can. And then it spills over, it improves as you go on about your day. That practitioner's treatment you went into, just everything in your day is just humming so harmoniously and peacefully. So it's spilling out. It's spilling out into your world. So are you in for this journey?
Yes.
It's an amazing journey. And you're going to have the collective will of each of you assisting you. If the one presence, one power, one intelligence of God is acting as the health of your body, the life of you, it's acting as all the perfection in the world, the Christ is being revealed. You have finally come to the experience of not only in me and through me, but then the transformation as me. So you think you know yourself well, but often you know yourself in accordance to mortal mind. The mortal mind that has engaged a belief in two powers. When you're in your true mind and you don't have that mortal mind, your love of self, of life, of God will dramatically change. And take a deep breath. The one thing that often holds you back more than any other thing, which I have not really addressed, a son will address it in the right timing, is that your perceptions of other people will change dramatically. Yes, it's the one clear thing that we can say to you. You've done all the self-work. You've thrown off the shackles of unworthiness and shame and guilt. You don't engage in human habits that hold you down, like criticism, condemnation, judgment, blame, and gossip. But the one thing that still stands out, and I'll call it a red flag, is what you have not addressed head on. And that's your perceptions of other people. And you often keep them so silent that you don't even let yourself know that maybe some of the limitations that you're having in your life is because maybe you are maintaining some unhealthy perceptions about other people. You know, around 6 o'clock, I start coming close to your messenger in preparation for the evening. And I can say to you that coming down the elevator from the penthouse in the building he lives, a woman gets in the elevator. And she has lovely blonde hair, but it's obvious to the messenger that it's not natural, but it's still beautiful. And she's speaking, she's friendly, and the messenger says, "You're probably not from South America, and you're not Mediterranean either. What's your accent?" And she says, "Persian." "Do you know what that is?" And the messenger says, "Yes, I know, Iran." And she says, "Yes." She's a very bubbly personality. And then the messenger says to her, "I love Persian people. I think the Iranian people are some of the nicest people, and it's such a shame the Americans don't know it." And she said, "I 100% agree with you. Have a wonderful day." Now that's a healthy perception. That's a healthy, your messenger's perception of Iranian people, and not only them, as a whole group. He loves Filipinos. You ever met Filipino women? I mean, they're just the most loving, caring. They're just wonderful people. Just so wonderful. So I'm going to leave you that as I leave now. I've asked you, you know what consciousness I've asked you to, truth I've asked you to hold all summer. Is one of you willing to stand and recite to me that truth? All right, Olivia?
God can only be experienced directly and personally in a moment of silence.
Yes, God can only be experienced directly and personally in a moment of silence. This is truth. That's truth. And I'm asking the student body, collectively, because individually you will all gain, all throughout the summer, just find time in your day, go as you're going on about your day, and It's wonderful to do these things when you're on your own and maybe you're driving to work or shopping. But dear heart, you try when you're at work and you just remember just to silently repeat that to yourself a few times, and you see how that doesn't have a wonderful impact upon you. So that's your summer homework. Everybody willing? And the second thing I'm asking you to realize, it's not severely detrimental in the student body because of all the work you've done, but there are some instances where I see it does show up. So here's the truth. People do not know the limitations they suffer is often because of the perceptions they have about other people. Can you accept that?
Yes.
So can you maybe just be with that and ask yourself, are my perceptions of other people healthy? Try and look inwardly. Try to look at your life and try to find some examples where maybe your perception of someone, maybe it was proved to be wrong. And maybe you could do yourself a really wonderful deserving thing, and maybe you could generalize in the most wonderful way. You know not the terrible plans that the Russians and the Americans have at this hour. You know not what the American government has done to its people in making them think so horribly about Iran. Do you think a Russian mother or a Persian mother loves her children any less than a Canadian or French or Australian mother? And politics and governments are often responsible for influencing people and wrecking their perceptions. Let's have healthy perceptions of people. I always find in the world that people face in this world, and it's one of the first things that I helped your messenger with in 1985. And I said to him, one day you will know that your mother loved you as much as she possibly could. That may not have acted out, but it's the truth. How can a person love when at a dear core level people don't even know they have core perceptions against the mother? So do try, precious hearts. God bless you. I thank you. Many students gather in your nation, Canada, for the wonderful conclave that is coming in Edmonton. Namaste. We love and bless you, Mother Akasha. We thank you for your presence with us. Deep breath.